Okay, Tansei, Weetakap. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on day 2 of our Orange Shirt series. Before we begin this evening, we're going to start with an opening prayer and a smudge, as we do customary in circle. And so we invite those that are online with us today to join us in whatever manner works for them. But we will be doing smudge and prayer here as we sit in circle. And so I'm going to turn it over to our elders to begin us in a good way.
Just light that coal. There you go. Yeah. Okay. Match. No. Just put them there. Okay. So we'll start with the smudge. It's always good to acknowledge Creator. And in our way, when we're going to formally start coming together, and I think we call it in the Western world call to order, in a formal way, our smudge. We use the sweetgrass to make smudge, and that's our call to order. It represents a connection to Creator. The smoke represents a true thing, and it also represents a safety in this circle when we talk. So I'll acknowledge Creator. O kahe, ais chipatapi, ayo napi natu, sikitets kachimata, halo kristikoik, hadam sikstachika kristiko gitens kachimat. O kispumu kidap sitokem stuiki nitschimakakia nakachimoiskan. Ach spumu aksawan ikachimoiskan nit nikutaya kuchipo ispiawan kotakui. Ai spumu kinana sitoki nakumanstai ka kimatu sinan. Hanik daya kuto aya kutkano pina daya kuchipo ispina. Akumanstai ka kiman. O gido pachimo iskana kop kitapiwak. Hanaka itapiwak itasukina kimakita mo kais. O kini to ikanak bokawak makisatu siskinimatsa. Essok chika takku. Ais chipata pia bispomu sana kum kita piawak. Hanaki sitoka pokpiawak aiku siwak. Ai spomu saus chipata pia. Hagok siskatumoyawan kristikuik. Makukat skuno saw sitokyo. Anika chimoiskani makukat tu taima natu sukui. Hagok chika kimai. O kika kuat chimoiskamuta nesta watchima. Thank you. I'll pass it over to the chair. We just leave it here. Just leave it here. In our way, from wherever you sit, you put your hand towards the smudge and you use the smudge. And the reason we do that, when we have a teepee, we sit in a circle and we make an altar right here on the ground. And that's where we make our smudge. And once the smoke comes up, everybody sitting around puts their hand towards the smudge. We don't take it around.
With the land acknowledgement. The land acknowledgement is extremely important in our way because it honors traditionally who was on this land, but also our responsibility to this land and our responsibility to one another. So Trellis is is committed to reconciliation and starts with taking this opportunity to acknowledge our honor and privilege to live and work within the Treaty 7 territory. We acknowledge the traditional and ancestral territory and oral practices of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika Nation, the North and South Piikani Nations, and the Kainai Nation. We also acknowledge the other members of Treaty 7, First Nations, the Tsuut'ina and the Iahei Nakota, Stoney Nakota people, which include Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. In addition, the City of Calgary is home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3, and we also acknowledge all the nations, genders, and spirits who live, work, and play in Mohkinstsis, the Blackfoot name for Calgary, and Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta, who help us steward this land, honor, and celebrate this territory. Well, I guess it's time to introduce myself, too. I always forget that piece. So my name is Jessica Smith. My spirit name is Singing Buffalo Woman, which was recently gifted to me by Daryl and Linda Brass. And like I said, I will learn how to say it in Cree, I promise. But it takes some time, so I don't want to butcher it. I work with our now named agency of Trellis, with several programs there. My family, I hail from Halifax. My dad is from Peterborough, and my mom is from New Brunswick. And that's a little bit about who I am. And I'm going to turn it over to my better half, for sure.
Thank you. Good evening, Wetakap, everyone. For those that I have not met in person, my name is Christy Morgan. I also have the Blackfoot name of Crow Spirit, Mistui Bixi, given to me by Reg and Rose Crowshoe. I come from the Secwepemc Nation in British Columbia. I'm from the Slicktaus First Nation, so for those in English, the Bonaparte First Nations, part of the Shuswap Nation in British Columbia. But I have had the honor and privilege of being able to work and play here in Mohkinstsis, Treaty 7, Calgary area for many, many years. My family is from BC on my father's side, so obviously from the Shuswap area, and my mother's family is of settler descent. And to my sister and I both reside here in Calgary, and I get to have the privilege of working with many of us in this room with our new agency, as you've heard, Trellis. So Aspen and Boys and Girls Clubs of Calgary formally merged, and our new name was announced yesterday, and so Trellis is our new name. So welcome to Trellis's second day of Orange Shirt Day. So you're probably wondering, I signed up for Boys and Girls Club, and now I'm at Trellis. What's going on? You're at the same place, the right place, so welcome. Tonight, we're very privileged to have a great group of elders here with us. If you tuned in yesterday, we had Elder Carrie Moore with us yesterday speaking. She has joined us again. We will take a break partway through, so we will have a 10-minute break partway through. And we also encourage you to, if you have any questions, any comments that you want to put into the feed within YouTube, we do have staff monitoring it, and feel free to ask us. We want this to be, while you're not here physically in space with us, you are sitting in our circle with us, and so feel free to engage as much as you wish. We invite comments, we invite feedback. That's the magic of sitting in circle, is to have that opportunity to sit and learn from each other. And so as we get into this evening, which is about resiliency and looking at it from an Indigenous lens, we will have some great discussion here tonight, so we want you to be a part of that. So when we get into this, before we do that, I'm going to introduce our fantastic and amazing elders and knowledge keepers that have joined us this evening. And so I have the privilege of introducing Carrie Moore. If you tuned in yesterday, which we got great, fantastic comments about Carrie, came all over our feeds that they loved your words. So thank you so much. Carrie Moore is a MSW, RSW Cree Métis from Saskatchewan. She also has a private practice and specializes in intergenerational trauma work and grief. She's a sessional instructor at the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Calgary, and is one of the most fantastic people that I know. I said this yesterday, and oodles of love for the people in this room. I've had the great privilege of working with these three, and the deep love and profound gratitude I have for each of you each and every day. I am thankful that you're able to share space and share your knowledge, and I just love sitting in space. So I'm very honored to have Carrie, Reg, and Rose here today. So Carrie, thank you for all the work that you do in our community, the many boards you sit on, that you graciously give your time and your energy to in helping our people. I'm just very thankful that you're able to join us again for the second evening, so thank you so very much. And Jessica.
So I have the honor of introducing Elders Reg and Rose Crowshoe. Dr. Reg and Rose Crowshoe are honored Blackfoot elders and are traditional knowledge keepers. They've advised not only us, but many committees within national, provincial, and local scopes focusing on work with elders, youth, culture, and also the environment. Both of you, I think, are instrumental in the development of the Elders Knowledge Circle and work closely with United Way of Calgary and the larger Calgary area. Dr. Crowshoe is a former chief of the Piikani Nation, and he also regularly lectures at academic institutions like the University of Calgary, and was influential in the development of the education program at the Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump. He also co-authored the book, I might butcher this, Agatstimon, which explores Indigenous concepts of justice and sentencing circles, but also, much like Carrie, Reg and Rose support us in our program and in our agency on so many levels. And I don't know how much we can give thanks to the work that all of you do for our young people, because they're our future. And so without your knowledge to pass on, we lose our culture. And so I don't even, like, it's hard to put that into words of the support and the gratitude that I know I can speak on behalf of myself and my team and the young people as well for you guys continuing to come and be a part of the work that we're doing. So, hi, miigwech.
I also just want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for this event. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. So TC Energy, FMAV, and 7 Generations. We're always thankful for support so that we can help continue to spread knowledge and love. And thanks.
So like Christy said earlier, tonight we're focusing a lot on reconciliation. Yesterday we spoke about residential schools, but more focus on how that impacts us and a lot of what we see today as a result of residential schools. And so we are going to start by passing it over to the elders to talk a little bit about resiliency that you're seeing in the community, your own resiliency, and how you've gotten to that point. What are things for you in your life that have put you into a space where you can speak about resiliency, but also help our community in developing that resiliency for themselves? So I'll pass it on over to you.
Thank you for introducing us. I want to maybe talk about resiliency, first of all, from a personal perspective. I'm from the Piikani First Nation, and when I was young, we started school at Piikani First Nation. And when I talk about starting school, my grandmother said I was gonna, kya kutushkinimatsuku. Kya kutushkinimatsuku means that I'm gonna go and be taught something. So in our traditional way of teachings, we were taught in age grade society. So my cousins and other kids from the community that my grandmother brought together, she taught us in Sistiks, the Little Bird's model of education. And in the Little Birds model of education, we were taught our language, we were taught our stories of natural laws and creation, we were taught through stories because we look at natural laws as being a world that we are a part of. The environment was life and life was environment. So when you talk our language, we were taught that the concept of sanctify kindness and love was a part of every word you say. And our words come from the environment. You hear a bee fly by, and we call it namu by the way it sounds, but namu already also is understood with sanctify kindness and love. So you don't have to say it all the time. You just speak the language because that's what it comes with. So I was confident in the community with the people in the community speaking to me in language, and I knew that it was all a part of love. So that's where I thrived. That's where I wanted to learn at these societies, wanted to be a part of the community. Any challenge that I took on, the language was a big part of it, besides the understanding. And love was a big part of it. Then my life changed. I guess I would say before I went to residential school and life changing, resiliency was part of the language and love. So if there was anything, challenges I took on, the language I spoke included the love and sanctified kindness that we shared with each other. And that was resiliency. That's what we used. However, when I was taken to residential school, at residential school at 5 years old, I remember in the fall when we went to school, and I was one of the younger ones, the new kids that were in school, but in the dorms at night you can hear them crying, and I was part of them crying because I was split from my family and I was lonesome for my family. And through the early years of residential school, as a young child, you're looking for TLC. They're looking for love because their kids were lonesome. And when the staff came and hugged you, it led right to sexual abuse. And then later on to physical abuse, then later on to mental abuse. So you start understanding these abuses. And you can't speak your language, you have to learn English. And there was no love I never found any love in the English language. It was just a language. But also the newcomers to our country that abused us, they used the English language and they never showed love. Instead, they showed abuse. So I suffered with that. Well, I wouldn't say suffer. I would say I survived that for 9 years. I learned that I transformed into the Western world with the Western language. And through those 9 years at residential school, I never even mentioned the word love because I didn't even know what it meant. I totally didn't know what it meant. You hear the word in stories and stuff. They read you from storybooks, but you don't even know what it means. After residential school closed, we were all happy. I had big smiles. They're closing the residential school. We left, we went home. And that was where I first started suffering traumas from residential school. And I guess the trauma would be, I went home and I told my mother that I was having a hard time hating and not liking white people for what they did to me at residential school. Every time I went into town, I ended up getting into a fight or something, and the police got involved because of my retaliation for the treatment at residential school. So thinking that your mother is going to support you on what you do, and here I was retaliating and hating white people. My mother said, "Here, let me make a smudge. Sit down here, make a smudge." She called Creator. And in our language, she said, the smudge gives us that sanctified kindness for everything, even animals. And so as soon as she brought me back to the smudge, it started coming back to me from when I was young. But the hardest thing she told me was, we're all humans. Even the people that abused you at residential school, we're all humans. It's humanity. And we all survive together, and we're a part of the environment. And in my mind, at a young age, I was so mixed up. How can I like these guys for what they did to me? Now my mother's on their side, and she's telling me not to get mad at them because they're human. So those were beginnings after residential school. How do I become resilient? How can I cope with this challenge that was in front of me? How do I accept what happened? So it was through the smudge, through our language, through the elders, our stories, that brought me back to the first years before I went to residential school. It brought me back to the safety of that world, and it brought me back to understand what love is, what kindness was, and the smudge. So using that process and practice, bringing me back to the language that connected me more with our indigenous way of doing things, allowed me to become more resilient, showed me ways to overcome, like disliking white people that abused me at residential school, being able to get along. And it took me through all those years. I never hugged my children when I was growing up, because if I hugged them, it automatically goes to sexual abuse, and I wanted to protect them, so I never hugged them, because at the residential school, getting a hug means sexual abuse right after. So I was protecting my children, so I wouldn't hug them. Only my great-grandson today, after a couple generations, is showing me how to hug and what love is. And I'm sharing with him the stories. So even at my age, I'm still working on resiliency. And I believe the language, the smudge, our way of doing things, our knowledge capacity through our stories as a verbal society will teach us and be more closer to becoming to be resilient. I look at the years at residential school and on the reservation, and the years of Indian agent and on our reserve. And those years, we were denied our language, our smudge, the way we pray, the way we sing. Those were denied. And as they were denied, our children were distant from those ways further. They started following. They learned how to read, but being able to read, they fell into a way of being addicted to the written default system that we all live in today. So they view their own culture from the default system lens. And when they talk about resilience, they're trying to understand what resilience is. They need to go back to their language, to their smudge with the elders, to feel the language and to feel resilience. We need to connect those two back. And that's why I believe in being able to come out to boys and girls to help them with stories and talk to the children about what I understood before transformation happened to me was residential school. So that's how I would understand resilience.
My name is Rose Croshoe. My traditional name is Ahkoin Nimaki, and that name was given to me by my great-grandma. My great-grandma taught me a lot of traditional teachings, my grandma, my mom. And then even, I didn't go to boarding school, but my parents did. And the things that I saw, when I think back, and I watched them, it was like work all the time. You got to try hard. You got to have resilience within you, and how when they went to school, they weren't taught education. They were taught to work. And also the Bible. They were strong Catholics. And I remember instead of learning our Blackfoot language, my mom would teach us hymns, Latin hymns. So my brother and my sisters, we used to sing all those Latin hymns. That's all we knew. That's all she would teach us. Until my grandma used to come and she used to say, I think you better start teaching your children how to speak Blackfoot. But then again, my mom, when she went through residential school, like what Rich said, they couldn't speak their language. They couldn't practice their culture, even though my grandparents and my great-grandparents were real traditional thinkers. But they always had that art of our native art of how to sew a teepee, how to prepare food, how to, when we had a kill and how the food was prepared, getting ready for winter. And I think I remember when my mom had a big family. She had, I think, 6 sisters and 5 brothers. My dad had four brothers, and he had 5 sisters. So they came from a big family. But when we were born in our family, there was only my sister and my younger sister and my older brother. I was the oldest. So I had to kind of pave the, and I used to play, what I learned in school, like what Reg was saying, I didn't stay at the boarding school. We caught the bus, but we had to be ready early in the morning at 7 o'clock at the highway. And it was about 5 miles we had to walk. But my dad had a team and wagon, so he'd hook up the team, pick up our relatives that were day schools, get on there, take us to the highway, prepare a fire. He used to make a fire so we'd be warm. And because we had to be there before that bus came at 7. If we were late, the bus driver would just pass. He wouldn't stop or anything, so we had to all go back. So my mom said, you guys better be at that highway at 6:30, half an hour. So you can imagine my dad had to get up early, get the horses ready, team, and get my relatives all together, and we'd all be bundled up. We'd get to the highway and we'd get on the bus, and it was a long ride to the school. We pick up because certain kids at that time were day schools. We had a little bus. It was like a Suburban. It had boards, 2 seats or 2 boards on the side. We just sit, and our bus driver was he was a good bus driver, the one we had. And then later on, we had a different bus driver, and he was like, I'd rather not say his name, but he was really mean and stern, and we gave him all kinds of names we called, because we could see him from the back. We had all kinds of names for him, and my cousin was the one that came up with some really crazy names. So in our culture, we always had a nickname for everybody. So that's just what, and that was the fun part. And then even get into school. It was a long bus ride. We got to school. The first thing we'd do is go to church, go to the chapel, and have mass. And this one time was when we all got sent to our classroom, and they said, confession, we're going to have confession, so you kids, the girls, we'll send you guys to the chapel. So of course we all went to the chapel. We're fooling around again, and all of a sudden that confessional door opened, and here the priest stood, and he said, pardon my language, what the hell are you guys doing here, you little devils? And we were shocked. I said, how can a holy man like this talk to us? And we were in trouble, deep trouble. So of course we all got strapped, and then we're talking about, we were kind of afraid to tell our parents, because if we told our parents we were disobeying the adult, because all those laws, those rules that my parents got, they were given to us. My dad was a very strict man. He ruled by the belt because he went into the army, and he had that mentality of order, always attention, and just, you guys go do this work, and if you didn't get it done, he'd pull out the belt. And of course, this one day, my brother, he did something, and he took off, because I told him, you're going to get whipped by Dad. He said, I'm real fast, he won't catch me. And he started taking it. My dad was trying to catch him, because he was my brother was a hockey player. And because of the resilience, because of at that time when we were starting to assimilate with the town, there was racism, prejudice, but somehow the bus from Fort Macleod used to come all the way down to our place and pick him up, because he was a real good hockey player. He almost made it to the NHL, but then he fell in love, and then. But there was funny stories that happened there. But I always remembered the strictness, and even like sometimes, like my grandma would talk to me, and I'd talk to her in Blackfoot and understand all that. But my mom, you can't talk Blackfoot to the kids. You have to speak English, so that way they can get an education. So it was really driven into our heads about to get an education. By getting an education, you'll get a job, and you'll be able to fend for your if you're going to have a family. But as I was growing up, I never knew this man here. He was a foreign to me, because I couldn't associate with him. because of the policies that they put in our community, Catholics ruled the east side like gangs. The east side, the Protestants were the west side. The only time we met is at sports or something like that. And then after, as everybody, like Rich was saying, the Indian agent left, and then people started getting together. But my grandma never had, she had her friendship with his grandma. So the two old ladies got together and they were trying to match us up. And when they closed the schools in the late 60s, we got sent to Drumheller. And that's where I knew Rich, because we're in line again going to eat. And I told him, "Where are you from?" He just turned and he said, "Brockett." And I tapped him on the "Brockett? You're from Brockett? What's your name?" And he told me. So it was really ironic on that. And even when we got married, we had the government, you had to write a letter to the bishop asking us letting me be to marry him. And we didn't even get married in the church. We got married in the priest's basement. But then when we got married, we went across the road. All the elders were there. Everybody, they sang the songs and they prayed, and it was just so beautiful. That just so often, and then even now, my grandma was, she always traveled. She got her driver's license. She was the one that taught me how to drive. So she was driving, and of course, when there's a wedding, everybody goes through Brockett, you're blowing the horn, and she was the last one, and then she stopped, she ran into this guy. Well, it was just, it was so many things changed that I saw as a young child, and I was thinking, I wish I had 4 degrees or 3 degrees. I only got 1 degree in management, but on the traditional side, when Reggie and I married, I could be a PhD student or PhD professor, because of all the transfers that I got from the societies that we belong to and all that. So with all that knowledge, I teach my children, my daughters, and my other traditional daughters that I have, my friends, and my grandchildren. But we really, in our community, Red's talked about the little birds, and when he went to the little birds, there was a big gap, because the parents didn't send their kids to little birds. It was straight to school. So there was about a 30-year gap there, or void. Was it 30 years? We started the Nepo Magigs again, and that's where my grandkids went, and they really learned a lot. Today, they're all successful. We told them, in order to be ahead, you got to be friends with everybody. Treat everybody same, alike, and all that. No matter if they're treating you, unhealthy and all that. But always remember that there's laws there that could be protected by you on both sides. So they were raised with that, and then we had our great-grandson, Reggie talked about. This year was his first time in school. I told him, "Knox, you like school?" "Yeah." "Grandma, I go to an Indian school." I said, "You say indigenous." "No, I go to an Indian school, and I'm an Indian. He'd say that. But he really, when he was a baby, when he was about 6 months old, I started teaching him the language, just little words of animals. I'd give him the Blackfoot word, what the meaning was. So his mom would come and pick him up, and he'd see those. They'd go into the mall, and he'll see those. "That's the E name," and he said, "Where'd you learn that?" "Grandma taught me." And then we'd pretend he had this great big, it's like a boat. I said, "We're going to learn, first we'll learn how to write, write anything." So he was really drawn, and he said, "Okay, Grandma, let's have a fun activity." I said, "Well, we're going to pretend we're in a boat. We're going to go fishing." And I never knew, just him learning at an early age, he really enjoyed fishing. For his birthday, he got a fishing rod. He caught his fish. It was pretty big. He was so proud of it. And he watches. He's real observant. He watches. Because that's how, as children, how we learned was we watched. They'll say, watch me. This is what I want you to do. They didn't tell us, you do it like this, you do it this way. But we watched. So that was a kind of a learning that I passed on to him. So I'm just proud of my children and also my community. I could see where it really bothered, it really hit our community members. There's one boy, I'll just share one little story with this, he's almost like our son. His mom, I went to school with her. We both were day school students. We were both spoke the language, and I was telling him, oh, he said, gee, my mom was just a drunk. And I said, no, you don't say that. Your mom was a very good woman. I said, I went to school with her. This is what she did. And I'd tell him all the good things that he needed to hear, because all he saw was getting drunk and fighting, and that's all he saw. So I told him, this is why she was like that, because of the things that she couldn't understand. She got frustrated. She didn't have no help, or like today we have mental health in some communities, but they have help there. But her, when she was growing up, there was no such thing as help. So I think some of our people still really need that help in our community. But you're only here for so long, and there's so much you want to do in so little time. But I just thought I'd share that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for those stories. That's wonderful. Nitanako Muksanaki is my Blackfoot name. I was given that name by Kelly and Daphne Good Eagle, and I'm originally from Saskatchewan, as I said yesterday. In my community, very near my community, near Duck Lake, that was the last residential school to close in 1996. So I am not a residential, I didn't go to residential school, but I am a residential school survivor. And what I mean by that is that the trauma was passed down to me through the generations of my grandmother and my father to me. And I learned not to fight. Wedge was talking about how he learned to fight to protect himself. I learned to hide. And we all take on one of those behaviors of running away or fighting or hiding, and I learned to hide. For a long, long time in my life, I was very, very quiet because when I said things, I was afraid of what would happen. My father, particularly, grew up in a lot of abuse in his life, and my father was the gentlest, kindest man, despite what he went through in his life. Always very kind, always very gentle. And he could tell stories. And when he told stories, his whole face would light up. And everybody would laugh because they'd heard them many, many times. But he just had a way of telling stories. My father learned how to survive. And that was on Mother Earth. My father's family came from Lily Plain area in Saskatchewan, which was very much a Métis settlement, although his mother was Cree, and so that whole area was next to a forestry reserve. I don't know how large it was massive, and my father would go there, and that's how he would heal, and he would stay away for days at a time, but that's where he felt happiest. And he passed that on to me and to my brothers. And my father was an amazing hunter within our community. He learned how to hunt from his uncles, who were Cree, from Muscadet, our reserve, and many of the other reserves, and many of the Métis who were related to those communities. And my father learned all about putting tobacco down. He used to hunt one animal. He didn't just hunt indiscriminately. He would track and hunt one animal. It might take him days to bring that animal down. But he was always very respectful of the plants and the animals. And I learned a great deal from my father about Mother Earth, about medicines. And he would tell me the stories about how medicines saved people's lives when they were out in the bush. My grandmother was not allowed to speak her language, and so she would not pass it down to her children because she was beaten for it, literally, when she did, because she was coming from all of that trauma in her life as well. And so that language did not get passed down. And that is one of the greatest travesties for me, was not to have that language. I heard my grandmother speak Cree, and I picked up words here and there from her. I heard my auntie speak Cree, and they often would speak Cree when we were berry picking in that massive reserve. My father became an alcoholic because of the trauma he experienced in his life. You can't blame people for being addicted to anything, because he had to try and block out that pain and suffering that he had. And that was a coping method for him. And then my father went into, joined the war, the Second World War. He and his brother, and eventually my auntie as well. And they all joined together from that territory. And they met their First Nations cousins, their Métis cousins, and they joined together. Quite a few of them joined in that territory. And so my father, going in, I believe this, knowing what I know about trauma, that my father actually had PTSD. When I was growing up and I saw him, he probably had PTSD as a young man. But he definitely had PTSD when he came out of the Second World War. So my father's way of healing was still to go back to the bush. And as long as my father was in the bush, we didn't worry about him. He healed. That was how he healed. And my father came through that. He ended up letting that go, and he came through all of that. And he became a great teacher, a great support to our community. He had worked through that trauma. He had learned to cope, and he had learned to cope in a better way. And he was a very resilient man, despite what he went through. My mother as well. My mother was a very resilient woman, and my mother is 94 and she's still resilient. I was telling the story to the elders about how my mother had a terrible fall just a few weeks ago, and broke her elbow, broke her wrists, cracked her ribs. She looked like she'd been through a battle when I saw her, and we thought that was it. We thought my mother would have to go away to a home, because she lives on her own, my mother, at 94. And so we were prepared for that, to have to tell her that. And my mother, when I saw her just a few days ago, there she was. She had told them to take the cast off her arm, and she fought with them. And she said, "I can't do anything with this on my arm. Take it off." And so they did. And there was my mother pushing herself out of the wheelchair, walking, and she said, "I'm going home. I'm not done yet." So when you think of resilience and you think of all of the elders and the things that we've all been through in our lives, when we get to those points in our life where we think we can't go on, there's always somebody or something, or maybe going out and doing ceremony, which will help us get through it. So to me, ceremony was always a big part of my life, through my grandmother primarily, and then my father. And ceremony made me feel totally safe. It didn't matter what was going on in the world around me. I wasn't a good student. I had a lot of issues, challenges, but I was able to work through those. And the older I got and the more ceremony that I did, the more I became in touch with who I was, not what people told me I was. The more I realized that I was okay, and I was going to do what I had to do to help our children and our communities. And I'm very grateful that I am here today. And I'm here today because of the amazing support I had in my life and because of ceremony, because when I was in my darkest place, ceremony brought me back. And so resilience is a process for sure. And sometimes we think we're pretty resilient because we're still here, but I think we're pretty resilient when we get through all of those challenges and see that we don't need to believe in what other people say. We just need to know that we're okay and that we're just as good as everybody else. And that was the hardest thing for me to learn. And I know that the ceremonies are passed down to us even in our dreams, because a lot of songs came to me when I was in ceremony. I would sit there and I would say, I remember that song. But I have a little story to tell you about culture, and about even if you weren't raised directly in your culture as a child, it still comes out of you at some point. My little 3-year-old granddaughter went to her first round dance with me. In her little ribbon skirt, she was very happy about everything. And she had never heard fiddle music before. She'd heard powwow music before, but she'd never heard powwow music. She'd never heard fiddle music. And the Métis started to fiddle. And here's this little 3-year-old girl who's very shy. And all of a sudden, she said, Grandma, I want to dance. And she got up in the middle of everyone. I don't know if anyone saw her at that. And people could not believe this little 3-year-old. Her little feet went like she had been doing dancing all her life. And I said, how did you learn that? And she said, I don't know, Grandma, but the music just showed me what to do. So, you know, we are resilient people. We find our ways through it. And my father never said he loved me either. He came from the same place. And I didn't really tell my children I love them either. And I do, and they know that now, and I tell them that now. But it's my grandchildren too that I'm able to tell I love, and that I teach. I'm teaching them all about the culture. I'm teaching them as much as I can, because I know that our culture is our way to be resilient. It's what makes sense to us. And everybody out there finds their own way, I know, but it wasn't until I really went back to my culture that I really realized that I'm okay. And I use that term because up to that point, I didn't know who I was. I was somebody that somebody told I was, who I was. And so resilience is a process. It is a long-term process. We keep working at resilience in our lives. It's adaptability as well. But I just wanted to say one thing about resilience. When we're measuring resilience now in the Western way, we're trying to figure out what that looks like. And we ask all kinds of questions, and of people who might not give you the answer that you want. Because when you ask questions that people don't feel, they can't necessarily think their way through it. But often I am seeing people in the data that I see that people are resilient. And I look at the questions and I look how people have answered them, and I say, well, resilience to me is long-term. You can measure resilience when you know you figured it out. You're going to have challenges. You might have issues along the way, but you know how to figure it out, and you want to be here, and you keep moving forward. And sometimes when we're looking at data to measure resilience, we're not measuring resilience. We're measuring adaptability, because we are so adaptable as human beings that we want to please people. We want to be able to do the things in our lives to help our families. And so we adapt to many different ways. We're very adaptable human beings, very adaptable. But we have to remember that from a Western perspective, you're going to measure resiliency probably in a different way than an Indigenous way of resiliency. And we have to be careful with that because adaptability is something we all have. Resilience is a process. So it's wonderful to sit here and speak and to tell stories. And I'm just really, really grateful that my father was able to get to that point of his life where he was at peace with himself, and that I have the strength of my mother still to show me that keep going. You can do it. There's a lot of things for us to do in this world. Thank you.
Each of the way that you guys spoke about resiliency and your own story reminds me of some of the questions that we even had yesterday and how we support those around us. And talking about your journey, I think, really gives context to people, to myself included. Forever, when I sit in circle with you guys, I'm always taking something home. And, you think you're well, and then you're like, oh, that's actually a really good point about resiliency and about my own journey. And so thank you for sharing that. What time are we at here? So we have a few minutes before we take a break, so we're going to open it up for questions. I know we have a couple already, but I just want to again encourage people, please put the questions in the chat so that we can ask the elders on your behalf.
Had come in, so thank you all for sharing what you did, and I think this actually speaks well into when we talked about process or resiliency as a process. And we often have conversations around allyship and those that are coming from the non-Indigenous world that want to be our allies in helping support this process of resiliency or, working with us. How can our allies help create that process or that resiliency in our community as opposed to re-traumatizing us? A loaded question, I know. Sorry.
That's a good question.
I'll try a stab at it. I'm thinking of Carrie's words. We have to think of, we got to be careful when we think about resilience. Before I went to residential school, in my community, I was considered an Indian thinker. So an Indian thinker would be somebody that thought from a creator and the natural laws. Day and night are natural laws. So when we talk about natural laws, then we're accountable to the natural laws. So if my brain is going to think, then it's going to follow the guidelines of natural laws. And what I say about my thought is going to come from that worldview of natural laws. And when I talk about natural laws, my responsibility is going to be that the environment is life and life is environment. We're all the same. We're equal. We live in collectivity and we're equal. And that's the perspective I'll look at resiliency from. That would be an Indian thinker's lens. When you look at the Western thinker's lens, resiliency is going to come from what was written through research, and the default written system is going to write you that theory about resilience. And once you learn how to read, then you look at resilience And the concept of resilience from a default system is an individual resilience. And from that focus of an individual resilience, you can look at what resilience means. So there is a difference between a collective resilience and an individual resilience. So when our young people got split up from the language, they got addicted to the written default system, and now they speak from an individual lens of resilience. Even though they're indigenous, they're still speaking from that lens. When I look at allyship, all the resources in our way of thought, indigenous way of thought, we get gifts from the environment. And we use these gifts to develop systems and practice to build our knowledge capacities and human capacities. Because we get the gifts from the environment. We get the food, the heat, the circle, the TPs, the language, and we have to give back to the environment, look after them because it's collective. So that's, when we look at being a part of that environment, then that's the gifts we had to build capacities and knowledge to understand resilience. But however, after the treaties were signed and the default system was imposed on us, once Western acts, regulations, and policies were developed, the resources were taken, and whatever you benefit from the resources benefits a Western system to develop its own knowledge capacities. So we're suffering a system poverty. We're not getting our elders together to talk about knowledge capacities or resource capacities. But yet, you look at indigenous concepts from a Western perspective and you don't share with those resources. We need to build allies with organizations that can say, I can be creative with these resources and I'll use the resources to accommodate a gathering of elders with their smudge, their circle, their language, to build capacity so they can continually to support allyship. But if we don't, once that generation of elders are gone, where do we turn to get that knowledge? So I look at the allyship to support organizations to be creative, to be brave to be creative, so that they can be creative with the resources to work with elders, indigenous systems to build that capacity. And that allyship is important because we need to, that word is always hard to say. Reciprocity?
Reciprocity.
We need to protect those two allies need to protect each other so that they can work together to take on those challenges. So I think those are, that's what's so important.
Thank you so much. Got some great comments coming in here as well as some great questions. Got a couple more questions here. One from one of our fellow colleagues and coworkers here, Tim Fox, is coming in for a question here. And so Thanks, Tim, for following. Question is, reading today that a bill was presented and subject to legislation receiving a royal assent. This bill seeks to establish a national day for truth and reconciliation for federally regulated workers that will be observed on September 30th. What are your thoughts on September 30th potentially becoming a national stat holiday in recognition of truth and reconciliation?
My opinion, I don't know. I would say I learned from my mother and my grandmother when they talked to me about humanity. We're all equal, and humanity is a big thing. And I feel residential schools and the imposing of the written default systems on oral systems has been, and I don't know, I would say a crime against humanity. And as we talk about a crime against humanity, we can't push it under the rug and forget about it. We need to understand it at that level, because I did survive genocide through residential schools, and it was a crime to humanity. And it's tough for me to think about, oh, the government's just going to pay me some money and tell me not to talk about what happened to me at residential schools anymore. Forget about it. And to me, it's so real. It affected my whole life and still does, but I can't push it under the rug. And our children have to learn in the future what traumas did to our people. And I would look at that day being a marker for maybe resilience.
Well, I guess I would say that very much what you're saying, Reg, is that I think that having a day for Indigenous people to have that day, it doesn't mean anything unless people really have the awareness of what that means. And I think that we can't just say this is the day, that we're marking this day. It's a good marker, but I think I would like to see something done where people, when we see that day, we know what that means, because we're not being taught the history in school. So many people do not know about the true history of Indigenous people. And you're right, Reg, it is resilience, right? Because look where we've come, right? So I would say that I don't like to use that word, but I don't want it to be tokenism, just like what we sort of look at, right? This is a very important time for people to understand what happened, not just a day, let's just give them that day, which is what you were saying. So if that day is marked our day, I would hope that there is much more done within the schools where they are talking about the history, the real history of Indigenous people, and having the elders speaking to them on that day. Because I think otherwise it gets sort of lost, like a lot of other days get lost. And as Reg says, we're all human beings. We are all the same species, right? So we're all equal. We were created exactly the way we were supposed to be created. So we don't want to set people above. We don't want to set people below. We want everybody to know that maybe this is People's Day, and we're going to learn about Indigenous people from the reality of who Indigenous people are here in Canada, so that everybody else who is here gets to know who we really are. Because I still think there are people out there that don't even know why we wear orange shirts. Do you know what I mean? Don't give somebody an orange shirt and they go, oh, thank you, that's really nice, if they don't know why they have that orange shirt, right? So I'm pondering it, right?
I'm glad they're going to declare that, because it's educational. You got to know what happened. I mean, I was just thinking about this verse when I went to school. They used to tell us, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blues. And I said, sailed the ocean blues? You know, and I'm thinking, just that, I mean, what does it mean? You know, like, I don't know, what does that mean? So for the ordinary person, what does this reconciliation mean? You know, and why can't they get over it? But you know, it happened all over the world to Indigenous people. You know, it happened because of all the resources. They wanted to capitalize on the land. They wanted to take those resources out. But we were taught you only take a little, just a little, and then you save some for the rest. It's, you know, and no, now they're finally realize, oh yeah, we need limited resources. Then they finally realize, like, the next one is going to be water. Look, before we used to go to BC, oh, you see that water flowing, just flowing. But now, just a trickle. And you go down that way south to Arizona around there, oh, water, you'd see all these arts and crafts booths up, you know, and they're flourishing. But now they're all ghost towns. There's no water, nothing. They're trying to get the water from over here. But that's one thing we have to remember: the environment. The environment has to replenish. But you know, with the resilience, that too we have to look at it in a different worldview. Like today, look at it now, we're all sitting here talking to that machine. People are listening. And usually when back in the days, they'll see a person, when that person's talking to a machine, they're going crazy, you know? And on your cell phone, you're walking down the street and people have their headphones, they're talking. Holy smokes, it's just, you know. But those are the changes that are happening. And even the resilience that goes along with that. So it's if we didn't have social media, if we didn't have all this other technology, well, maybe we would still be in a healthy space. That's how I just throw that out.
Thank you all for contributing to that. Tim did provide a follow-up comment. Hand to heart for your wisdom to his question. Absolutely agree. A day stagnant without the crucial learning and unlearning that needs to be weaved into the fabric of this country's narrative, for sure. Lots of comments with people expressing hand to heart for your honesty and your comments across the board here as we go into our conversations. I have a few more questions, but I noticed that we're at time for a break. So keep the questions coming, everyone. We're going to take a 10-minute break. So make sure you go get your bio break, go get a snack, do what you need to do. We'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll get into some more questions. So thanks for joining us. Well, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good break and you got a snack and you got some coffee or some water. Some great, rich conversation, some great comments coming in. So thank you so much for contributing to this circle that we have this evening. We have a number of questions going to go on, so I'm going to jump into some questions here with our guests here. And this one comes around a question that's going to take, I think, probably into a really deep conversation. So everyone hang on here. So there's been some talk, if people have been following in the media or around communications, that there's been talk about someone who wants to bring back residential schools. What are our thoughts around that? I said it would be a hard question. A deep question.
Maybe I can, there's a couple things I want to say.
Oh, thank you.
When I went to school in the Little Birds, the gift of education was given to us by the Little Birds. So that grade level, when I went through that grade level, our oral system, we used songs to represent physical documentation. So when I passed that oral system of passing that level of Little Birds, that we got a gift from the environment, from the Little Birds as education, the song was my physical documentation, like my first grade report card. So that was an oral system. When the treaties were signed, the Indian Act and the imposed system talked about education. So when they talk about education to indigenous communities, they're talking from a Western perspective, from the default system, like Education Act, that tell us how to teach our children and the way we would teach our children. So when indigenous communities sign agreements to run their own education, the question from the elders was, are we giving up our Little Birds' right to education and taking on a Western written system of education authority? So if we look at bringing back residential school, I would say, let us bring it back with the concept that the Little Birds gave us the gift for first grade education, and we used the oral system of education to teach our children the curriculum that they need to know. And since the imposed system, with their acts and laws, took all the resources away from indigenous communities, they should pay for every one of those schools and have the indigenous communities control curriculum, method of teaching, and will use our education so that we can teach our children. Education in the indigenous world is a gift that you can learn from and live a good life. Education in the Western default system is also something that you can live a good life from. However, our education was imposed on and denied. So bringing back the residential schools, I would say, should come back with that control of how we would look at education and have the Western default system that has all the resources pay for every day of that education so that we can run our own education.
Anyone else have any thoughts around that?
I guess I would say that we are raised as human beings with Mother Earth, with the natural laws. All human beings had that at one time. All of us have been colonized over time, and it's through that colonization that we have forgotten that we are love and kindness and respect and honesty and accountability and responsibility and courage and all of the beautiful values that are part of all human beings. And so if we are going to learn, that's the way it would need to be taught. It would be because that is who human beings are. We are not mean, angry people. Those behaviors happen only when we're disconnected from our spirit, from Mother Earth. And so if the intention is, let's bring residential schools back, perhaps there are more human beings that are connected now back to the original teachings, that we are all of value, and then residential school would be taught exactly that way, just as Reg is saying, with that wonderful, all the values that human beings all carry if they have the safety to go into spirit. That's what I would say.
I think, what was the question to bring back residential school?
Yeah, there's been talk from some in the media that someone's trying to, or looking at the option of bringing back residential schools.
I think if you're going to bring it back, it's going to be like a way of life. You're going to look at like how our culture is, the way of life, and how are you going to work community. It's going to be a stewardship in our Indigenous knowledge. And I think once we do that, it will also help, especially like right now, look at the foster care. It's just booming, and it's all for money. And look at all some of these people. You'll see children on the streets. Well, they'll capitalize it. They're taking those children. I don't know where they take them to. They're missing. And I think if we go back to the school, how it's supposed to be, and even both cultures can learn from that, because you're going back to those values and principles of how to treat human beings, not like a money tree, or you have to start having that gimmapi pitsin again, the kindness that our ancestors had, that gave up Canada. That's all I'll say.
I think I would say the treaties. The treaties were made so we can benefit and have access to the land. However, only after the treaties did the written default system impose administration and ownership onto the oral system, so that we had to follow the written system. And we always give authority to written system. So if they're saying to give back the residential schools, if they're going to keep the authorities through written system, then that's a big joke. But if they're serious about giving us our fair, equal benefit from knowledge of the land, and a system of oral education to take control of that residential school and how to teach our kids. If they're serious about that, then we could be looking at ownership of education rather than speaking useless words of giving back residential school.
Thank you so much. It is a great question that was posed, so thank you to the person who posed that question. I think really getting into this sense of shared responsibility, and I mean, again, find that piece of element where we can find that parallel between both systems, but again, it's giving the equal opportunity for both systems to be treated just as that, as equal and just as valid in the world that we all have to live in terms of our young people having to balance in both worlds. This next question comes from our CEO, Jeff. Hi, Jeff. I understand you're watching at home. So question from Jeff is, when raising non-Indigenous kids, what do you most hope I share with them about ensuring that they do not create a world where Indigenous kids disproportionately require resiliency to survive?
Jeff, that's a hard question there, Jeff.
Oh, what was the last piece? Something.
So really looking at what can Jeff do to support his kids in ensuring that he's helping raise them so we don't have a world where our Indigenous kids are disproportionately required, why we don't require so much resiliency in order to survive. Like, how do we create that space where our Indigenous kids don't constantly have to rely on this resiliency, this word of resiliency, this actions of resiliency to thrive and be well?
I think of some of the history that I survived. I survived a time where the Indian Reserve still had an Indian agent, and I survived the time I was in residential school. Those were times I survived, but I also remember other times I was a part of. And one time, the former Prime Minister, Chrétien, wrote a paper in the 70s that was called the White Paper to abolish Indigenous and make everybody Canadians. But I also experienced the same time a document written by Harold Cardinal with the Alberta Chiefs that called for, we called it the Red Paper. And it was after that time of Red Paper that we were allowed to start speaking our language. Indian education was a big thing at that time. So that was a time where our children needed to be resilient, needed to be supported with resilience. And now I live in a day where we're actually talking about resiliency. But that was, from the White Paper to now, is almost 50 years or 40 years. And we're still talking about awareness, cultural awareness, cultural teaching. And we haven't never learned anything. Organizations have been aware and culturally taught. They've taken the information and they enhanced their own written systems to write more programs.
Oh, thank you.
And as they do that, we're not enhancing our own Indigenous ways of doing things like resiliency for our children. So I think we need to start having the discussion between two systems, the child welfare system and the Indigenous child welfare system. And the first part of that discussion I would look at, how do we build a playing field? How do we put ethical space together so we can have technicians from both sides to talk about what is parallel? And those parallels can be used to take on challenges like giving our young people the resilience they need to survive with. Those discussions were not there yet. We're not even at the point where we're talking about ethical space and having the discussions with the elders as technicians to have that discussion to find parallels. We're not even there yet. We need to be creative to build those ethical spaces and start those discussions so that we can put words into actions like policies, which allows us to work with our children to give them resilience. Right now, if there's no policies built with those two systems talking to each other, we're still imposing one on the other, and our children are still going to need to be talked to about resilience.
Thank you. 100%. I think there's some great comments coming in across the board on questions around like were there not resources for us to access when the residential schools were happening for us to build resiliency within ourselves. And I think, that comment alone speaks to that this is still an ongoing conversation that we're all looking to still have, that, while, yes, we have over 100 plus years of, loss and sorrow, and, talk about the white paper and the red paper. I mean, 50 years ago is not that far off, and we're now just at the point where we talk about things such as Orange Shirt Day, where it's bringing that awareness around this, where we're still having to have conversations about the education of not only our allies and those that, want to explore our shared history, but also amongst our own community members, right, and understanding what's happened to our community around this. And so absolutely, when we look at the topic around resiliency, we're still very much in the infancy of what does that actually mean, and still even reclaiming what our culture can be and should be, given that we're now living in scattered different family structures, community placements. Many of us are not living in home communities or settlements. And so even trying to navigate what that looks like as we go across balancing resiliency from a traditional standpoint and balancing culture, but also resiliency, I think, overall as human beings of living in a contemporary environment, of balancing two worlds. And so, absolutely 100%, I think we're still in the very infancy of what this all could mean as a collective, but it's starting off with some of these harder conversations that we're having and talking about the topics that we are, that this is actually going to open the floor to have those deep and meaningful conversations and creating platforms to have that ethical space to truly get to that balancing point within our community that we need to have. Some of our comments from our viewers have been around one, just expressing their deep gratitude for what's been said so far and the open and honesty of those in the room. And one comment in particular from a colleague is, Rose, what you had said around taking a little and leaving enough for the rest really resonated with them, and the willingness to share your personal aspects and your personal insight that this person said you're absolutely right. The new way of communicating is strange indeed. So thank you for pointing that out. So it says peace of it is opening these conversations as we sit here in circle with all of us physically, but also those joining us in virtual circle with us. We need to continue to have this. And so inviting, if anyone has any questions here while we're in physical circle, to add to it.
I have a comment. I know, Reg and Rose, we were doing Zoom with the kids the other day, and one of the things that had come up was around resiliency. And I had given the example, and I wanted to share that tonight. that our elders are a fantastic example of what resiliency looks like in our community. Often we talk about it in context with our young people, that they're our future and that they're so resilient that they live in these two worlds, but our elders do it too. You know, our elders have been through residential schools and have experienced all of this trauma and have lost their culture completely. And through time and healing and lots of hard work, you lovely humans have reclaimed that and are now sharing that with all of us, and helping us become more resilient and being examples of what that looks like for our community. And I think it's just really important to acknowledge that and share our gratitude for the hard work that you've put in, because without you guys, we wouldn't be able to kind of move forward and reclaim a lot of the things that we've lost. So just wanted to share that with you guys, and thank you.
Hey.
You kind of talked about it a little bit. Okay, yeah. Where we're in a state where we're walking between two worlds right now, especially our young people, and like it seems that on one hand, like I really like what you talked about by taking just enough, but in the Western culture, it seems about taking as much as you can get. So I'm just wondering how we can encourage and like navigate that, encourage our young people and give them a way to navigate this world of when they're being Indigenous and they have this one teaching saying, oh, only take what you need, and the other values being taught to them saying, no, you need to take as much as you can while you can. And how can they walk in a way that is both true and I guess resilient for themselves and not get lost in that dual identity?
I think our children are pretty smart today.
They are.
My grandson even teaches me how to use a computer. My great-grandson shows me. I would say our young people need to know both cultures. They need to know both systems, the written system and the oral system, so that they can be confident in making right decisions today. But if there's still a division where one system is imposing on the other, and they're being assimilated and addicted to a written system, then they're still in confusion because they're not being taught about their own systems, and they're not confident about those systems. And they're viewing it from a Western perspective lens. So not knowing their culture is so important. We need organizations to be creative, to be able to bring both systems together and start looking at how can we look at systems change rather than systems imposing. And as we look at systems change, the two systems, like I said, should be able to talk to each other. And the way we're talking about the two systems to talk to each other, I talk to my children in those two systems. I talk to them, for example, my grandson. I said, you're going to school now. ABCs and writing is so important for you to remember what you're being taught. So you need to know your writing. However, in our culture, we don't write. So the skills you need to remember is listening and visual skills. So you can remember. On this side is listening and visual skills, on this side is writing. But what connects it is remembering. If you can remember using both systems, then you're going to know who you are. And that's what I'm talking about in helping our young people understand. if the written system doesn't acknowledge or validate hearing skills and visual skills, then our children are going to still suffer, losing one side.
It's like this one, it reminds me of this one, we were teaching these young people our traditional songs. And this one guy here, he knew the writing and all that. And the old man, his dad was showing him, this is the song you're going to sing. So he was singing it, and all of a sudden he had a little notebook, he took it out. And that was the first time I ever seen someone to write it, to write that. And I told Reg, they're already learning. Look at them, they're learning, they're writing, and they're also learning the sound of how that song goes, the history of it. So when Jeff talks to his kids, he could talk to them about a story, about history, about creation stories, because little kids, they like to hear these stories. My daughter she told me, Mom, come with me. I'm going to talk to these kids about stories. They want to hear about creation stories. So we went there, and they were all non-natives. They all came and they sat around. And you know, the way she presented herself, the movements of those animals, she was almost talking like those animals. And you know, you could hear a pin drop, and this one parent said, that's the first time I've ever saw my child sit through a story like that. Because when we're talking about the visual, the around. You're not just going straight, you know, just like, and I think that's what nowadays our children are learning those. Even like my friend Janet Danson, she's going to be a champion jingle dancer one of these days, and she watched and she listened to the sound. And if Janet can do that, then Jeff, your children can do what you're asking your children if they know how. How do you teach the children? Because like Rich said, the young children are they're fascinated. They want to learn. And they're real quick at learning things. Like my other grandson, he was about 5 years old. They were driving down the road. Of course, Reg was speeding. My grandson was sitting there, and all of a sudden the cops came and stopped him. And he was listening. He was listening to that cop. He said, "Sir, can I have your driver's license?" Gave him his driver's license. You know, you were speeding. And Reg said, "Yeah, I was trying to get my grandson to school." He said, "Okay, well, we'll see you again. So have a good day." So when he walked away, my grandson told his grandpa, "Grandpa, is he going to stop you again when he said, 'We'll see you'?"
But that's observation, visual and hearing. So I think if we can validate oral and written, cross-validate, I think we can go a long ways.
I think another thing too is the fact that we forget those pieces of who we are as a whole being. And another piece of that is feeling. And feeling is very important for us to be able to understand things and to be able to express ourselves. And so that's another piece that is often left out of education, often left out of, in our own homes, people say, don't talk about that, or don't cry. And so we get to a point where we don't want to go there. It's very foreign to us, or we don't want to sit and observe or listen because it's very foreign to us. There's so much going on in the world around us. So part of raising children is to allow them and to let them see us reflect, take that time. And we do that in ceremony. That's why ceremony is so important to us, we take that time to reflect on what we need to do and what we're feeling so that we can change that. And so I'm reminded about COVID, for example, right? COVID has come and it has created this time where we have to be isolated, and what happens is we're reflecting. And reflection is so difficult for people to do because they're not used to it, that they become very frightened of that. And the reality of it is, we need to reflect every day. We need to be able to take that quiet time and teach children about that so that they can actually express what they're feeling. Because our feelings are an important part of our healing. So those things that we talk about, like listening and seeing and feeling, are often left out of the Western system. What the Western system feels, what the Western system thinks is what we think about and what we look like are the most important parts of our life. And in so doing, it creates people that don't know how to express their feeling. And if they do, they're feeling less than. And they don't know how to find that place within them which is peaceful to them, because people are constantly trying to control us. We know as Indigenous people, in our ceremonies, we take that time to reflect, because when you reflect, you become connected to who you really are, and nobody can control you in that place. So we have to remember that we're whole beings. We're not just thinkers and physical beings. And we have to take that time to be complete and whole and teach children about looking inward at themselves, teaching children about what they see, and really accepting the fact that children and people are going to see things in a different way, and that's okay, because we're all very unique. But we have to have that whole way of healing, of living our lives and teaching children to be whole, not half. Because right now in the Western world, we are half beings. We are physical and cognitive. That is the way the Western world directs its research, its healing, everything. And until we look at that whole being and start with how do you feel rather than what do you think, we're really going around in circles. We're not getting anywhere. We have to be whole in what we are doing.
Thank you so much. I feel full of oral and reflection, like lots of reflection right now. I think I'm going to go home with lots of reflection, I think, from this evening, which is good. I think to me, when we can sit in space and have these conversations and I think exercise the muscle of our oral listening and our minds, that's how we learn to grow. And just based on a lot of the comments and stuff that we have coming in, I know we're at the end of our second evening. So want to thank our panel and our elders, our knowledge keepers, our members here with us in Circle, all of you online who've joined us for joining in this evening. Thank you for bringing us in this topic around resiliency. It's going to be a nice compliment for everyone who's going to be tuning in tomorrow evening. Tomorrow we have our allyship continuation, but also a continuing conversation of yesterday's and today's evening as well that we'll be doing. And so we have a conversation coming in tomorrow evening around allyship and also a virtual round dance. So hopefully you're able to join in with us online if you haven't signed up already. We will be here in person getting our dance on over here. And so looking forward to spending some more time with everyone. Want to thank our sponsors again for helping us host this 3-day session with us, and our colleagues and our Trellis family for supporting us. Again, Reg, Rose, Carrie, never enough words I can ever express the thanks that you always give your time and your energy. Much love and appreciation for all of you every single day. Thank you again for joining us. Have a great evening, everyone. Be safe, be well.